Welcome to week 7. This is where we take on the topic of clinical psychology and its treatments. Now, to me, clinical psychology can be confusing because there's a lot of variations, a lot of things that people talk about, and many of us have experiences in our families with some of these disorders. But I think we can simplify things by looking at two basic categories to start with. Those are disorders really of the mind, and let's call them psychosis types, and they're like schizophrenia. And then we have disorders of the mood, where the person is in pretty good contact with reality, but the way they interpret it is wrong. And so this is the classic glass is half empty of the person who might be judged to have depression. Now, fortunately, since the 50s, we've had something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's now in its 5th edition, which was published in May 2013. And this manual lists a number of criteria. And let's look at the table of contents and see what that looks like. So here's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5 contents. And you notice that in section 1.2, there are 18 disorders that are listed. Now, these disorders include a variety of mood issues, things like bipolar and related disorders, which can have some psychosis in it, depressive disorders, and anxiety disorders. But I want to call our attention to 1.22, the schizophrenic spectrum and psychotic disorders. Psychotic disorders are the most difficult to treat because they really involve some sort of departure of the mind from reality. That's what we call the psychotic break. Classically, such people might have hallucinations. They might see things that aren't there or hear voices. And sometimes this gets wrapped up into a very large scheme, such as in paranoid schizophrenia, where the person really has a fundamental delusion that they're being persecuted or that they're Napoleon or something that forms an integrated scheme that is really way off base. These people or characters are often favorites for movies because they can be completely dedicated to something terrible and provide for a very good plot. If they occur in your life, as they have in my circle of acquaintances, then they can also be a terrible burden. I had a friend who was an artist who believed at one point in his illness that his left hand was Rembrandt's left hand, his actual left hand. And he called me up one day and said, "Jim, this is great news because you see, now I can paint authentic Rembrandts and sell them and make a lot of money." And I told him, "You might want to have that checked out by some art experts because I think there's a few people that might disagree that your paintings are authentic Rembrandts." The psychotic breaks are so out there that it's hard to know how to treat them. You really want to treat them with drugs or confine the patient. The mood disorders, by contrast, are something that we can often relate to. Who hasn't been a little bit blue or anxious about something? And so depression and anxiety disorders can have an element about them where you can relate to the person and you sort of want to grab them and try to bring them back to reality. Yet these disorders can be very stubborn and very painful for families. At one point in America, Valium was the #1 prescribed drug because it was treating anxiety, although some people thought that folks were using it to treat social anxiety in a way that was perhaps more personality sculpting than treating a major mental illness as a mood disorder. In any case, mental illnesses account for a lot in America of lost productivity. And one of the great benefits that psychology has brought to humankind as a science is to better understand these and to treat them medically, even if that treatment involves talking therapy, cognitive therapy, for example, to try to convince someone who sees everything as a glass half empty, that's actually unrealistic. So there's a great benefit that psychology has brought to the world in terms of helping to improve human productivity as well as improving human happiness by dealing with these terrible conditions. Now, we've really only talked about 2 types here, and remember from DSM-5 there were 18 categories. And we'll get into this a little bit in lecture. But for now, I think let's stop here and discuss in the next video treatments.